Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
I married the wrong man? Have you ever looked at the person sleeping beside you and quietly wondered, did I ruin my own life? I never imagined I would ask myself that question. From the outside, my life looked almost perfect. I lived in a peaceful American neighborhood. I had a comfortable home, healthy children, and a husband who never forgot to take out the trash or pay the bills. Friends often smiled and said, "You're so lucky." They thought they knew my story. They were wrong. The truth is that one cold Monday morning, while making coffee in my kitchen, I secretly opened my laptop and searched just 6 words. How do I file for divorce? I stared at the screen for almost 10 minutes. My hands were shaking. I was not angry. I was simply tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of smiling. Tired of feeling lonely while wearing a wedding ring. If you have ever felt trapped inside a life that everyone else admired, then maybe this story is also about you. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I almost walked away from the man I believed was the biggest mistake of my life. Looking back now, I can honestly say something that still surprises me. I was completely wrong. But I didn't know that yet. At that moment, all I could see were the problems. My husband and I rarely argued loudly. In fact, that was the strange part. We were polite. We shared meals. We attended our children's school events together. We looked like the happy American family people expect to see in holiday photos. Yet every evening, our conversations became shorter. How was work?
Fine.
Did the kids finish their homework? Yes. Good night. That was almost everything. Silence slowly became another member of our family. Nobody noticed it except me. Maybe you are learning English today because you want a better future, a better job, or more confidence. I understand that feeling because I also believed that improving one small thing each day could slowly change an entire life. I never expected those small conversations, spoken slowly in simple English around our dinner table, would one day help save my marriage. But before I tell you how that happened, you need to understand why I wanted to leave. It wasn't because of one terrible fight. It wasn't because of betrayal. It wasn't because someone else entered our lives. The truth is much more uncomfortable. Sometimes love doesn't disappear all at once. Sometimes it fades so quietly that you don't notice until one morning you wake up beside a stranger who still wears your favorite anniversary gift. In the United States, people often say marriage is 50-50. I used to believe that too. Now I think that idea is incomplete. Some days one person gives 90 while the other can only give 10. Other days the roles change completely. Nobody told me that before I got married. Nobody explained that real love often looks ordinary instead of exciting. I spent years comparing my real marriage with perfect couples on social media. That comparison quietly poisoned my heart. Every smiling photograph made me wonder what was missing inside my own home. The more I compared, the less grateful I became. Then one evening something happened that changed everything. I found a small handwritten note lying under a coffee mug. I was certain it was meant for another woman. My heart stopped. My entire future seemed to collapse in a single second. I remember whispering, I knew it. I married the wrong man. I had no idea that 5 minutes later I would discover the truth, and that truth would completely rewrite the story of my marriage. If I had packed my suitcase that morning instead of waiting just a little longer, my children would have grown up in a very different family, and I would have spent years regretting a decision made during my weakest moment. So before you decide whether you would stay or leave, walk with me through this story. I promise you this journey is not really about choosing the right husband. It is about learning how easily fear, misunderstanding, and silence can disguise themselves as the truth. And perhaps, somewhere inside my story, you will discover something unexpected about your own life as well. The man I thought was wrong. The strange thing about heartbreak is that it doesn't always arrive with shouting, broken plates, or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrives wearing clean shoes, carrying grocery bags, and asking if you need anything from the store. That was my husband. Every morning he woke up before sunrise, brewed coffee for both of us, kissed the children goodbye, and drove to work without complaining. If someone had watched us for only 5 minutes, they would have said, "That family looks happy." If they had stayed for 1 hour, they would probably have believed we were the perfect American couple. But nobody stayed long enough to hear the silence that filled our home after the front door closed. I did. Every single day. That silence became louder than any argument we had ever had. I started asking myself a dangerous question. What if I had married the wrong man? At first, I blamed his personality. He was calm when I wanted passion. He solved problems when I wanted comfort. If I cried, he looked for answers instead of simply holding my hand. I thought he didn't understand me. I thought he didn't love me the way I needed to be loved. Looking back now, I realize I was measuring love with the wrong ruler. But at that time, I couldn't see it. All I could see were the differences growing between us. Life in America moves fast. Bills arrive every month. Children have school projects, sports practice, doctor's appointments, birthday parties, and endless schedules. Adults spend most of their energy trying to keep everything running smoothly. Somewhere between paying the mortgage and folding laundry, we quietly forgot how to be husband and wife. We became excellent teammates, but terrible lovers. Every evening looked almost exactly the same. Dinner, dishes, television, phones, bed, repeat. We lived together, but we stopped truly seeing each other. I remember scrolling through social media late one night. Perfect anniversary dinners, romantic vacations, couples laughing on beaches, beautiful surprises with flowers and handwritten love letters. Instead of feeling grateful, I felt disappointed. I never asked myself what those online photos didn't show. They didn't show debt, stress, anxiety, or tears. They only showed highlights. Yet I compared my everyday life to someone else's best moments. That comparison slowly poisoned my heart without me realizing it. Around that time, I started noticing little things that suddenly looked suspicious. He smiled while reading a text message. He stayed a little later at work. He bought a new shirt without telling me. My imagination became louder than reality. Psychologists often explain that when trust becomes weak, the human brain automatically begins filling empty spaces with negative stories. Instead of asking questions, we create answers that fit our fears. That was exactly what I was doing. Every quiet moment became evidence. Every ordinary habit became a mystery. Every delayed reply felt like betrayal. The truth was much simpler, but fear never likes simple explanations. One Saturday afternoon, we visited a neighborhood park with our children. They were laughing, running, and chasing bubbles across the grass. Parents smiled at us, as if we had everything figured out. Then my youngest daughter grabbed both of our hands and whispered something I will never forget. She said, "Mommy, I like it when you and Daddy smile at each other. You don't do it very much anymore." My heart almost stopped. Children notice everything. They don't always understand the reason, but they always feel the atmosphere. That sentence stayed with me for days. Still, instead of talking honestly with my husband, I continued building invisible walls around my heart. Then came the evening that convinced me my marriage was over. I walked into our bedroom looking for a charger when I noticed his phone lighting up on the nightstand. A message appeared on the screen. I only caught a few words before it disappeared. I can't wait to see you again. My stomach twisted into a knot. My breathing became heavy. Every fear I had secretly collected over the past year suddenly felt real. I didn't know who had sent it. I didn't know the full conversation. But in that single moment, I believed I finally had proof that I had married the wrong man. I had no idea that the truth behind that message would shock me far more than anything my imagination had created, and that one simple explanation would force me to question not my husband, but the stories I had been telling myself all along. The night, I almost walked away. That text message stayed in my mind long after the phone screen went dark. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, but my heart refused to listen. The words, "I can't wait to see you again," echoed in my head while I washed dishes, folded laundry, and smiled at my children. I looked across the dinner table at my husband, and for the first time in years, I didn't recognize the man sitting in front of me. He laughed at something our son said. He asked if I wanted more salad. He looked completely normal. That frightened me even more. I had always believed that if someone was hiding a secret, there would be obvious signs. Instead, everything looked ordinary. And sometimes ordinary can be the perfect disguise. That night, after everyone was asleep, I quietly walked downstairs. The living room was dark except for the small light above the kitchen sink. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat alone on the couch, listening to the sound of the refrigerator humming in the silence. I kept asking the same painful question. Should I stay, or should I leave? It wasn't only about my marriage anymore. It was about my children, my future, and the life we had built together. I imagined packing a suitcase before sunrise. I imagined explaining to my daughter why mommy and daddy would no longer live in the same house. I imagined celebrating birthdays in 2 different homes. Every picture in my mind felt colder than the last. Yet another voice inside me whispered, maybe this is the only way to protect yourself. Fear has a strange habit of pretending to be wisdom. It tells you that leaving is safer than asking difficult questions. Psychologists often explain that when people experience uncertainty, the brain naturally fills missing information with negative assumptions. It is a survival instinct. Thousands of years ago, expecting danger helped humans stay alive. Today, that same instinct can quietly destroy relationships if we allow fear to replace communication.
I didn't know those facts at the time.
I only knew that my imagination was creating stories much faster than reality could correct them. The next morning, my husband noticed I looked exhausted. Did you sleep okay? He asked gently. I forced a smile and answered, I'm fine. It was the biggest lie I had told in years. Sometimes people think relationships end because couples stop loving each other. I have learned something different. Many relationships begin falling apart the moment 2 people stop telling each other the truth about how they feel. We were still sharing a house, but we were no longer sharing our hearts. During the following week, I started watching him more carefully. Every phone call caught my attention. Every smile made me suspicious. Every unexpected meeting at work became another piece of imaginary evidence. I wasn't searching for the truth anymore. I was searching for proof that my fears were correct. The human brain loves confirmation. Once it accepts an idea, it begins collecting only the evidence that supports it while ignoring everything else. My husband came home earlier than usual and said he needed to go back out for about an hour. I'll explain later, he said with an unusual smile before grabbing his keys. My heart started racing. This was it. I was certain he was going to meet the woman from the text message. Without thinking, I made a decision I never believed I would make. I picked up my car keys and followed him. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I stayed several cars behind, hoping he wouldn't notice me. I parked far away and watched him walk inside carrying a small paper bag. There was no restaurant.
No hotel. No romantic café.
Just a quiet building with no large sign outside. My heart pounded harder than ever because now I had even more questions than answers. I waited inside my car for nearly 20 minutes, unable to decide whether to leave or confront him. Then the front door opened. And the first person I saw walking out beside my husband was someone I never expected to see. In that instant, every story I had invented inside my head began to crumble. And I realized I understood almost nothing about what had really been happening. The secret I never expected. I sat frozen inside my car, barely breathing as I watched my husband step out of the building. But it wasn't another woman walking beside him. It was an older man with gray hair, moving slowly with the help of a cane. My husband gently opened the passenger door, helped him into the car, then smiled in a way I hadn't seen for months. I blinked several times, convinced I had misunderstood what I was seeing. This wasn't the romantic meeting I had imagined. It wasn't a secret date. It wasn't the ending I had already written inside my head. Still, I couldn't drive away. Curiosity pulled me forward. Family counseling and men's support center. My stomach dropped. Suddenly, nothing made sense anymore. Why would my husband come here? Why had he hidden it from me? Why had he never mentioned this place? I stood there for several minutes before quietly returning to my car. On the drive home, I didn't feel relieved. I felt confused. Sometimes discovering that you're wrong is even more frightening than proving you're right. That evening, my husband came home carrying takeout from my favorite restaurant. Normally, I would have thanked him. Instead, I couldn't stop looking at his face, wondering how many secrets were hiding behind those familiar eyes. We ate dinner with the children, helped them finish their homework, and tucked them into bed. Everything looked ordinary again. But this time, ordinary felt different. Around 10 o'clock, after the house became quiet, my husband surprised me. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. My heart immediately began racing. I nodded without saying a word. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table where hundreds of ordinary family dinners had taken place. Yet somehow, this table suddenly felt like the most important place in the world. Before I could ask a single question, he spoke first. "I know something has been wrong between us for a long time," he said. "I can see it in your eyes." Tears immediately filled mine. I wanted to ask about the text message. I wanted to ask about the counseling center. I wanted to ask whether he still loved me. But before I could speak, he quietly reached into his pocket and placed his phone on the table. "Read it," he said. My hands shook as I unlocked the screen. The message I had seen days earlier was still there. "I can't wait to see you again." But this time, I opened the entire conversation. My heart nearly stopped. The message wasn't from another woman. It wasn't from a secret girlfriend. It was from his father. Every Friday, my husband drove him to a support group after the death of his mother nearly a year earlier. His father had been struggling with loneliness and depression but had begged my husband not to tell anyone, including me, because he felt embarrassed asking for help. The paper bag I had seen contained homemade soup my husband prepared every Friday morning before work because his father often forgot to eat. I stared at the messages in complete silence. Then I noticed something else. Mixed between conversations about doctor appointments and grocery lists were dozens of messages mentioning me. "She's been carrying too much lately. I wish I knew how to help her smile again. I think she's unhappy, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong." Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. The man I believed had stopped caring had been quietly worrying about me the entire time. He wasn't hiding another relationship. He was hiding someone else's pain while silently carrying his own. Psychologists often describe something called the fundamental attribution error. We naturally assume other people's actions reflect who they are instead of considering what they might be going through. I had fallen into that trap completely. I believe my husband's quietness meant he no longer loved me. In reality, he had been exhausted, emotionally overwhelmed, and desperately trying to support both his father and our family without becoming another burden. Then he looked directly into my eyes and whispered words I will never forget. I wasn't afraid of losing this marriage because I stopped loving you. I was afraid of losing it because I thought I wasn't enough for you anymore. At that moment, every wall I had spent months building around my heart collapsed. I realized we had both been living inside different stories without ever sharing a single chapter. But just as I believed everything was finally becoming clear, my husband reached into his jacket pocket one more time and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "There's something else," he said quietly. "I've been waiting for the right time to tell you." I stared at the envelope without touching it. I had no idea that what was inside would test our marriage far more than any misunderstanding ever could. The envelope that changed everything. I stared at the envelope as if it were something dangerous. It wasn't thick. It wasn't marked urgent. It looked like an ordinary white envelope that could have contained a utility bill or a birthday card. Yet my husband held it with both hands, as though it carried the weight of our entire marriage. Neither of us spoke. The kitchen clock suddenly sounded louder than ever. Tick, tick, tick. Every second felt like another reason to delay opening it. Finally, he pushed it gently toward me and whispered, "Please read it before you decide whether you still want to leave." My fingers trembled as I slowly broke the seal. I expected to find divorce papers. Maybe financial problems. Maybe a confession I wasn't ready to hear. Instead, I unfolded a single handwritten letter. The first sentence stopped me completely. "If you're reading this, it means I waited too long to tell you how much you matter to me." I looked up at my husband, confused. "Keep reading," he said quietly. The letter explained everything. Nearly 8 months earlier, after noticing how distant we had become, my husband had started writing down his thoughts because every time he tried to speak, he feared saying the wrong thing. He admitted that he had watched me slowly lose my smile, but instead of asking how I felt, he buried himself deeper in work, believing that providing a stable home was the best way to show love. He wrote that every overtime shift, every extra project, and every long day at the office had never been about escaping our family. He thought earning more money would reduce my stress and give our children more opportunities. He never realized that what I needed most wasn't another paycheck. It was his presence. As I continued reading, tears blurred the words. "I know I haven't been the husband you deserve," he wrote. "Not because I stopped loving you, but because I forgot that love must be heard as often as it is felt." Those words pierced my heart. I had spent months believing he no longer cared, while he had spent those same months believing he was failing me every single day. How could two people living under the same roof misunderstand each other so completely? Relationship experts often explain that successful marriages are built less on avoiding conflict and more on repairing emotional distance before it.
Become permanent.
Couples who regularly express appreciation, ask honest questions, and remain curious about each other's feelings tend to build stronger emotional security over time. We had done the opposite. We assumed instead of asking. We guessed instead of listening. We protected ourselves instead of trusting each other. Somewhere between busy schedules and endless responsibilities, we forgot that marriage is not maintained automatically. Like a garden, it quietly grows weeds whenever it is left unattended. I reached the final page of the letter and noticed something folded inside. It was a list. At the top he had written, 100 reasons I still choose you. Number 1 said, you still laugh at your own jokes. Number 7 said, the kids become calmer whenever you walk into the room. Number 23 simply read, you make ordinary days feel like home. I couldn't stop crying. This wasn't a letter written overnight. The dates beside each sentence stretched across many months. While I had been collecting reasons to leave, he had been collecting reasons to stay. Suddenly, I felt ashamed of the stories I had invented inside my own mind. Then I asked the question that had haunted me for weeks. Why didn't you just give this to me sooner? He smiled sadly before answering. Because I kept waiting until I became the husband I wanted to be. I thought words wouldn't matter unless I had already fixed everything. That sentence changed something inside me forever. So many people wait for the perfect moment to apologize, to forgive, to say, I love you, or to begin again. But perfect moments rarely arrive on their own. They are created by imperfect people brave enough to start talking before everything is fixed. That night we didn't magically solve every problem in our marriage. We still had difficult conversations ahead. We still carried old wounds that needed time to heal. But for the first time in over a year, we stopped acting like strangers sharing the same address. We spoke honestly until almost 2 o'clock in the morning. We admitted fears we had hidden for months. We laughed through tears. We even practiced speaking simple English sentences together, just as we had done years before when we promised never to stop learning side by side. It seemed like such a small thing, yet somehow those slow conversations reminded us how patient we once were with each other. As we finally stood up from the kitchen table, believing the hardest part was behind us, my husband's phone suddenly rang. He looked at the screen, and all the color disappeared from his face. He answered only once before whispering, "We're coming right now." Then he turned toward me with tears filling his eyes and said 6 words that would change our family forever. "It's my father. Something is terribly wrong." The night we nearly lost everything. The drive to the hospital felt endless, even though it normally took less than 15 minutes. The only sounds inside the car were the windshield wipers pushing away a light spring rain and the quiet voice from the GPS telling us where to turn. Just 1 hour earlier, we had been sitting at our kitchen table, finally telling each other the truth after months of silence. Now none of those conversations seemed important anymore. Life has a strange way of reminding us what truly matters. When we arrived at the emergency room, my husband's younger sister was already waiting outside. Tears streamed down her face before she even said a word. My heart sank. For one terrifying second, I believed we were too late. She rushed toward us and whispered, "He's alive, but the doctors aren't sure what will happen next." I watched my husband's shoulders collapse with both relief and fear at the same time. We hurried through the bright hospital hallway until we reached his father's room. The strong, independent man I had always known looked smaller than ever beneath the white hospital blankets. Machines quietly beeped beside his bed. Tubes surrounded him. His eyes were closed. I had never seen my husband cry before that night. Not when he lost his job years earlier. Not when his mother passed away. Not even during the hardest seasons of our marriage. But as soon as he took his father's hand, tears rolled silently down his face. In that moment, I realized how much pain he had been carrying alone. For months, I had believed his quietness meant he didn't love me anymore. The truth was far different. He had been trying to protect everyone around him while quietly falling apart inside. Many psychologists explain that chronic emotional stress often causes people to withdraw rather than communicate. Some become more talkative. Others become almost silent. Neither response automatically means they care less. Sometimes silence is simply exhaustion wearing another face. Watching my husband stand beside his father, I finally understood that lesson. Hours passed in the waiting room. The children stayed with a neighbor while we waited for updates from the doctors. Hospitals have a way of slowing time. Every minute feels longer than the last. People who have never spoken before suddenly share coffee, stories, and hope because everyone sitting there understands the same fear. Around midnight, a doctor finally approached us. He explained that my father-in-law had suffered a mild heart attack. Fortunately, someone had called emergency services quickly enough to prevent more serious damage. He would need time, rehabilitation, and major lifestyle changes, but he was expected to recover. I closed my eyes and quietly thanked God. My husband didn't say anything. He simply sat beside me and rested his head on my shoulder for the first time in many months. That small gesture meant more than 1,000 perfect words. The following weeks changed our entire family. We visited his father almost every day. Our children drew colorful pictures for Grandpa and proudly taped them to the hospital wall. Nurses smiled every time they walked into the room because our youngest daughter insisted on reading simple English storybooks aloud to him. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect. Sometimes she stopped to sound out difficult words. But nobody cared. Her slow reading filled the room with hope. It reminded me that healing rarely happens all at once. Whether we are learning a language, rebuilding trust, or recovering after illness, progress usually comes one small step at a time. Those visits also changed something inside my husband and me. Instead of rushing through our days, we began noticing ordinary moments again. Morning coffee together, evening walks through our neighborhood, family dinners without phones on the table. We even created a new habit. Every night before going to bed, each of us shared one thing we appreciated about the other. At first it felt awkward. Then it became natural. Research from relationship psychologists suggests that expressing genuine appreciation regularly can strengthen emotional connection and reduce resentment over time. Looking back, I believe those tiny conversations saved us just as much as the long emotional talk we had in the kitchen. Then, just when life finally seemed peaceful again, my father-in-law asked to speak with me alone. His voice was still weak, but his eyes were completely clear. He reached into the drawer beside his hospital bed, removed a small worn leather box, and placed it gently into my hands. "I've been waiting many years to give you this," he whispered. I looked at my husband, confused. He seemed just as surprised as I was. Slowly, I opened the box, never imagining that what I was about to discover would completely change the way I understood my marriage, my husband's family, and the promise we had made to each other on our wedding day. The box I never expected to open. I held the small leather box in both hands, but suddenly it felt far heavier than it looked. My father-in-law watched me with tired eyes and gave me a gentle smile. "Go ahead," he whispered. "It's yours now." I slowly lifted the lid. Inside wasn't a piece of expensive jewelry or a stack of old money. There was a simple gold wedding ring, slightly scratched after decades of wear, and beneath it lay a folded piece of yellowed paper. My husband leaned closer, clearly seeing these items for the first time. "Dad, what is this?" he asked softly. His father took a slow breath before answering. "That ring belonged to your mother. She asked me to keep it safe until the day I knew you two truly understood what marriage meant." My heart froze. I carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was delicate, but still easy to read. It was a letter written by my husband's mother only a few months before she passed away. The first sentence immediately filled my eyes with tears. "If you are reading this together, it means your marriage has survived the moment when most people choose to give up." I looked at my husband. Neither of us spoke. We simply continued reading. She wrote about the early years of her own marriage. She admitted that there had been a time when she secretly packed a suitcase because she believed she had married the wrong man. She described crying alone in the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed. She confessed that she had almost signed divorce papers without ever telling her husband how lonely she felt. Every sentence sounded painfully familiar. It was as if she had somehow been watching my own life years before I lived it. Then came a paragraph that completely changed the way I thought about love. Marriage rarely ends because two people stop loving each other, she wrote. It usually begins to break when two good people silently believe they are fighting alone. Those words echoed inside my mind. That was exactly what had happened to us. I believed I was carrying the marriage by myself. My husband believed he was failing me every day. Neither of us realized we were both exhausted from trying to protect each other in silence. Family therapists often explain that emotional isolation inside marriage can be more damaging than open disagreement. Couples who continue sharing honest emotions, even difficult ones, are often more resilient than couples who avoid every uncomfortable conversation. Looking back, I finally understood why silence had become our greatest enemy. We weren't enemies. Silence was. My father-in-law reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. Your mother-in-law made me promise I would never interfere in your marriage, he said quietly. She believed every couple has to discover their own strength. But she also told me there would come a day when both of you would need this letter more than advice. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I think today is that day. My husband lowered his head, unable to hide his emotions. For the first time since we married, I saw the little boy inside the grown man. He wasn't pretending to be strong anymore. He wasn't trying to fix everything. He simply cried. Without thinking, I reached over and held his hand. It felt strangely familiar, almost like the first time we had walked together years ago. Before leaving the hospital that afternoon, my father-in-law smiled at both of us and said something I will never forget. Don't spend your life asking whether you married the right person. Wake up every morning asking whether you're becoming the right partner. That sentence stayed with me during the drive home. The rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, making everything outside the car seem brighter than before. For the first time in months, we drove without heavy silence between us. We talked about ordinary things. The children, dinner, weekend plans. They were simple conversations, but they felt alive. When we arrived home, our daughter ran to the front door and threw her arms around both of us at the same time. She looked up with the innocent honesty only children possess and smiled. You're smiling at each other again, she said. I missed that. I thought the hardest part of our journey was finally over. I believed we had learned everything we needed to save our marriage. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Because less than 24 hours later, someone knocked on our front door carrying a large envelope with both of our names printed across the front. What was inside wasn't another family letter. It was an official document that would force us to make the biggest decision of our entire lives. A decision that would either bring our family closer together than ever before, or test everything we had just rebuilt. The decision that tested our marriage again. The large envelope sat on our kitchen table for nearly an hour before either of us touched it. After everything we had survived during the past few weeks, I honestly believed nothing else could surprise us. I was wrong. My husband slowly opened it while I stood beside the window, pretending to water a plant that didn't need water. I watched his expression change before he said a single word. His eyes widened. Then he looked at me with a mixture of excitement and fear. I don't know if this is good news or bad news, he whispered. Inside the envelope was an official job offer. A company in another state wanted him to lead a new division. The salary was far higher than he had ever earned. Better health benefits. Better retirement plans. A larger home. A fresh beginning. On paper, it looked like the opportunity every American family hopes for. But there was one problem. It meant moving hundreds of miles away from everything our children had ever known, leaving behind his recovering father, changing schools, rebuilding friendships, and starting over at a moment when our marriage had only just begun to heal. I looked at my husband and smiled politely, but inside, I felt the old fear returning, not because of the move, because I was afraid we were about to repeat the same mistake. Months earlier, he would have accepted the offer without asking how I felt because he believed providing more was the best way to love us. Months earlier, I would have smiled and secretly buried my disappointment until resentment quietly grew again. We stood at exactly the same crossroads, but this time we had a different choice. Relationship researchers often explain that healthy marriages are not defined by the absence of difficult decisions. They are defined by how couples make those decisions together. The strongest partners replace the question, "Who wins?" with a much better question, "What protects our family?" That night, instead of rushing toward an answer, we did something we hadn't done in years. We talked. Really talked. We made coffee long after the children had gone to bed. We placed 2 notebooks on the table and wrote everything we feared, everything we hoped for, and everything we refused to lose. It wasn't a debate. It wasn't about convincing each other. It was about understanding each other. For the first time since we married, I didn't interrupt him. And for the first time, he didn't immediately try to solve every concern I shared. He simply listened. That simple difference changed the entire conversation. I admitted I wasn't afraid of moving. I was afraid of becoming invisible again inside another busy chapter of life. He admitted he wasn't chasing a bigger paycheck. He was chasing the feeling that he was finally enough for our family. We both became quiet after those words. Isn't it amazing how often people argue about money, jobs, or houses when the real conversation is actually about fear? The next morning, we visited his father together. He was recovering well and even joked that the hospital food had convinced him to live another 20 years just to avoid eating it again. After laughing together, my husband told him about the job offer. His father remained silent for a moment before smiling. "Don't ask what gives you the biggest house," he said. "Ask what gives you the strongest family." Then he turned toward me. "Your mother-in-law used to tell me that success means very little if the people you love feel alone while you're achieving it." Those words settled deeply into my heart. During the following week, our children unknowingly helped us find the answer. One evening, our daughter drew a picture of our family standing in front of our home. Above our heads, she wrote 4 simple words in bright blue crayon. "Together is my favorite place." She didn't draw a bigger house. She didn't draw expensive cars or vacations. She drew people holding hands. Children often understand happiness better than adults because they haven't yet learned to confuse comfort with connection. That picture stayed on our refrigerator, quietly reminding us what truly mattered every time we walked into the kitchen. Finally, after many long conversations, my husband picked up the phone and called the company. He thanked them sincerely for believing in him, but he respectfully declined the position. When he ended the call, I asked the question I had been holding inside for days. "Do you regret it?" He smiled, took my hand, and answered without hesitation. "Years from now, I won't remember the salary they offered me. But I'll always remember the day we chose our family together instead of choosing success alone." I thought that decision marked the end of our greatest test. I believed life would finally become peaceful. But just a few days later, while cleaning a shelf in our bedroom, I accidentally discovered something hidden behind a stack of old photo albums. It wasn't another letter. It wasn't another family secret. It was something my husband had been quietly working on for nearly a year, and the moment I saw it, I realized he had been planning a surprise that would change the ending of our story forever. I fell in love with my husband again. I almost placed the old photo albums back on the shelf without looking behind them. If I had, I would have missed the surprise that changed the ending of our story forever. Hidden in the corner of the closet was a worn blue notebook, tied with a simple piece of string. At first, I thought it belonged to one of our children, but when I opened the first page, I immediately recognized my husband's handwriting. Across the top, he had written one sentence that made my heart stop. How to help my wife smile again. I sat quietly on the bedroom floor, completely speechless. Page after page was filled with dates, ideas, observations, and little promises he had written over the previous year. Some pages listed restaurants he wanted to take me to once life became less busy. Others contained simple reminders like, tell her she's beautiful before work, walk with her after dinner, and listen without trying to fix everything. One page simply read, ask her about her dreams again. I haven't asked in too long. Tears slowly rolled down my face. While I had spent months collecting evidence that my husband no longer loved me, he had quietly been collecting ways to become a better husband. He wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But love had never disappeared. It had simply been buried beneath responsibilities, exhaustion, and silence. There was one page that caught my attention more than all the others. It was titled, Anniversary Plan. Underneath was a sketch of a small family picnic by the lake where we had our first date. He had planned everything months in advance. There would be homemade sandwiches because I always said they tasted better outdoors. Our children would secretly help decorate the picnic table. At sunset, he wanted to ask me one simple question. Will you choose me again? My hands covered my face as I cried. The anniversary had been only 2 weeks away. He had hidden the notebook because he wanted every detail to be a surprise. Before I could close it, a folded photograph slipped onto the floor. It showed us on our wedding day. We looked so young, so hopeful, so certain that love alone could solve every problem. On the back of the picture he had written, I still see her every time she smiles. In that moment, I realized something important. Marriage doesn't slowly fall apart because people stop remembering the wedding day. It begins falling apart when they stop creating new memories together. Relationship experts often explain that couples who intentionally continue building shared experiences, whether through conversations, traditions, or simple daily rituals, strengthen emotional bonds over time. Love grows through attention. Neglect, even unintentional neglect, quietly weakens connection. That evening, instead of pretending I had never found the notebook, I decided to do something unexpected. I cooked his favorite dinner. After the children went to bed, I placed the notebook in the middle of the table. He looked at it, then at me, and immediately understood what had happened. His face turned red with embarrassment. I wasn't supposed to find this yet, I said with a small smile. He laughed nervously and rubbed the back of his neck. I guess I'm not very good at hiding surprises. We both laughed harder than we had in months. It wasn't because the situation was funny. It was because the heavy weight we had been carrying was finally beginning to disappear. Then I reached into my pocket and placed something beside the notebook. It was the divorce attorney's business card I had secretly kept since that morning when I searched online for a way to end our marriage. I looked directly into his eyes, tore the card into tiny pieces, and dropped them into the trash. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Sometimes actions become the loudest conversation two people will ever have. A few days later, on our anniversary, my husband insisted we take a drive without telling me where we were going. When we arrived at the lake, I saw exactly what I had already discovered inside the notebook. The picnic table, the flowers, the homemade sandwiches, our children hiding behind a tree, trying not to laugh. As the sun slowly disappeared below the horizon, my husband took my hand exactly as he had planned and quietly asked, if we met for the very first time today, knowing everything we've been through, would you still marry me? I smiled through tears before answering, yes, because now I finally know who you really are. I believe that was the happiest moment of our lives. But as our children suddenly shouted, "Mom,
Dad,
look behind you," I turned around and saw something that neither of us had expected, a surprise that would transform our family story into something even more beautiful than either of us had ever imagined. My husband turned at the same time. Walking slowly toward us was his father. Only a few weeks earlier, he had been lying in a hospital bed, too weak to stand without help. Now he was smiling, holding a small paper bag in one hand and using his cane with the other. The children ran toward him, laughing as they wrapped their little arms around his waist. My husband stood completely still. Then, without saying a word, he hugged his father tighter than I had ever seen before. That simple moment reminded me of something I had forgotten during the darkest days of my marriage. Happiness rarely arrives through dramatic miracles. More often, it quietly returns through ordinary moments that almost seem too small to notice until one day you realize your heart feels lighter than it did. Yesterday, my father-in-law reached into the paper bag and handed me another envelope. Everyone laughed when I immediately stepped backward and said, "I don't know if I trust envelopes anymore." Even my husband laughed so hard that he wiped tears from his eyes. "Don't worry," his father smiled. "This one won't scare you." Inside was a single family photograph. It had been taken many years ago on the day my husband graduated from college. His parents stood beside him, smiling proudly. On the back was another handwritten note from his mother. Families are not remembered because they are perfect. They are remembered because they keep choosing each other after difficult days. I read the sentence twice before quietly placing the picture against my heart. Months ago, I believed my marriage had reached its ending. Now I understood it had actually reached its beginning. For the first time, I stopped asking whether I had married the wrong man. Instead, I asked a much better question. Had I truly learned how to love the right way? The answer wasn't found in one emotional conversation or one beautiful anniversary. It was hidden inside hundreds of ordinary choices we now made every day. We ate dinner together without our phones. We walked around the neighborhood after sunset whenever the weather was nice. We thanked each other for small acts that we once ignored. We apologized faster. We listened longer. Sometimes we even laughed about how close we had come to throwing away something beautiful simply because we had stopped talking honestly. Psychological research has consistently shown that long-term relationship satisfaction is often built through frequent positive interactions rather than rare grand romantic gestures. Small expressions of gratitude, active listening, and emotional responsiveness create trust over time. Looking back, I realized that my marriage wasn't saved by one perfect moment. It was rebuilt through dozens of imperfect conversations where both of us finally decided to tell the truth instead of protecting our pride. Life in America remained busy. Bills still arrived every month. Children still argued over homework. Laundry still seemed to multiply overnight. Our lives didn't become easier. We simply stopped facing those challenges alone. One evening, several months later, my daughter sat beside me while practicing her English reading homework. She looked up with a smile and slowly read one sentence aloud. "Home is where love grows." She paused, looked around the room, and said, "Mom, I think this sentence sounds like us." I smiled because she was right. Not long ago, our house had felt quiet, heavy, and emotionally distant. Now it felt warm again. Not because every problem had disappeared, but because we had learned to solve problems together. Sometimes viewers ask me whether the story is completely true. My answer is simple. The emotions are true. The lessons are true. The mistakes are true. And if even one person watching today decides to have one honest conversation instead of giving up too soon, then every painful chapter of my journey was worth sharing. So, did I really marry the wrong man? For a long time, I thought the answer was yes. Today, my answer is completely different. I didn't marry the wrong man. I married a good man who was quietly fighting battles I couldn't see, just as I was quietly carrying pain he couldn't see. We nearly lost each other not because love disappeared, but because silence became louder than love. The day we finally chose honesty over fear, everything began to change. If you're listening to this story while questioning your own relationship, remember this. Don't let one difficult season convince you that the entire story is over. Sometimes the chapter that feels like the ending is only the page before the happiest beginning. And maybe, just maybe, before deciding whether to stay or leave, the most important conversation of your life is still waiting to happen tonight. That is all for today. I will make many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next one.